Gotcha. Raise off, Richie. Take the raise off the side. Okay, that's fine. Okay, now, gentlemen, we've gone through all the instructions in the dressing room. Okay, step back. Look here. Right here. If he goes right here, I'm not going to call him out, okay? If he goes right here, I'm not going to call him out. Now, I expect a tough, clean fight. Protect yourself at all times. Any questions from the challenger? She's second. Any questions from the champion? She's second.
3, 2, 1.
Let's get it on.
Ever since I was a kid, all the biggest fights, we're talking Tyson-Holyfield, we're talking Bo Holyfield, McCall Lewis. I mean, they were refereed by one guy. It was, it's always been the third man in the ring has always been Mills Lane. And so today, what we're going to do, we're going to have an interview with Mills through his son Terry. It's a little bit difficult for Mills to talk at this point, so we're going to ask his son Terry questions about his dad, about your dad, Terry.
Still get that fighting spirit and heart of a champion. He's going on 83 years old. He had a stroke, but he's still alive and still following boxing. In fact, Slava, you asked him who would win a third Holyfield Tyson fight, and he made a selection which I found a little bit surprising.
And we're going to post that at the end of the video. I'm going to edit it so that's going to be the teaser at the end.
This is personal for me because
in
1967, there was an undefeated professional boxer in Reno, Nevada. His name was Mills Lane. And I looked it up. He had 11 pro fights. A guy beat him in, I think, his pro debut by decision. He avenged that loss.
Artie Cox knocked him out, but he avenged the loss. Dad didn't avenge the loss.
He avenged the loss. And then people wanted him to become a politician and a prosecutor. So that's what he did. But let's put it this way. You want to know about the respect that Nevada has, and I was a Wolfpack boxer, although not hardly as good as Mills Lane. I got offers, many offers did not turn pro. People told me to join the circus, float like a butterfly, sting like a moth. But I was privileged to have Mills as a referee in many of my intercollegiate bouts against Chico State, Cal Berkeley, etc. And I'll tell you one thing, Mills said to me one day, asked me, how come I'm such a dirty fighter? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you rabbit punch, you spit the mouthpiece out constantly, and you just cheat. I said, Mills, I'm at a disadvantage in all my fights. He said, well, how's that? I wish I could make 156 pounds again, but he said, how's that? I said, these other guys train for these fights. I just found out about that. So I'm at a disadvantage. But Mills Lane, when and I would clinch a lot too because I wasn't in the greatest of shape. When Mills Lane pounded you on the back to break up a clinch, believe me, my back still hurts 40 years later. But a great man, a wonderful man. And there's so much respect for him nationally, internationally. But let me talk about Reno, Nevada.
All right.
And they named the courthouse after him. I think that's, for a lawyer and a judge, I think that's the ultimate sign of respect. It's the Mills Lane Courthouse. So it's wonderful to see and hear from Mills Lane.
I appreciate that, Marley. Yeah, I know it's it's great that they did that. It was, I think the ceremony was like in the late 2000s. I remember going to it. I mean, it's a big deal. It's the Mills v. Lane Justice Center, and still, it's the newest courthouse in town. And I'm just glad I don't have to be defendant there. But if I am, I know a guy who is connected with the building. So thank God.
Well, the old line, sometimes people would say, I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on TV. Well, your dad is a lawyer. He was a judge. He didn't just play a judge and a lawyer on TV.
Right.
He was well respected, and he was the law, man. In Nevada, Mills Lane put down the law, and you followed it. It was his way or the highway.
Hey, man, I'm a son. You're telling me. That's the way it was.
These are things that, let's say, I was curious about and as a fan. So for one, what was the favorite fight that he ever refereed that he enjoyed?
Easy answer. So he always said his favorite fight that he refereed was the rematch between Salvador Sanchez and Danny Little Red Lopez. And I think if you watch the tape, you'll understand why. It was just two tough guys going at each other, and it was such a great fight. My dad did end up stopping it. Sanchez won the rematch as in the original fight, and it's just a great fight. But he always said that was his favorite.
Did he have what about his favorite fighter?
His favorite fighter was Carmen Basilio. I think that this is me speculating here. They both were Marines. I think my dad saw a lot of Carmen in him, and himself and Carmen. Crude fighters, not too polished, but yeah, that was his favorite fighter. I will say though, in kind of to make it more contemporary, my dad really loved Bernard Hopkins. As my dad would say, he always tended to business, worked his butt off, stayed at weight, all these things that kind of, I think to my dad, Hopkins was a throwback guy. And so my dad just had a lot of respect. So,
very disciplined fighter.
That's right. And that was very important to my dad, and just kind of that throwback discipline, staying at weight, fighting at weight, not ballooning up, really important to my dad. And my dad did referee a couple of his fights. One didn't go so well where he pushed him out of the ring. Which he absolutely did not. He was breaking a clinch. It's not like he shoved them. But Bernard Hopkins was a guy who had my dad's utmost respect for, his entire career.
Well, that's actually, that's a little bit ironic. First of all, with regard to Basilio, we actually have an interview with Basilio. Mike and I did 2008 Hall of Fame. It's on the channel, guys. But with regard to Hopkins, yeah, there was the fight with Allen. We were discussing it like the other day, right? And, it's funny because the last fight of Hopkins' career, where he got knocked out, it looked very, very similar. Like he had a tendency to sort of like linger on the ropes or whatever, so it looked like almost similar. That's why he fell out of the ring.
Yeah.
But what I find ironic is when you mention Hopkins, I was talking to people. I have utmost respect for Hopkins as a fighter, but I felt he was one of the dirtiest fighters.
And for a referee to kind of like have that respect, I don't know. I wish he could speak to it more than because I can't, but I just know he had this admiration for Bernard. It had a lot to do with the weight thing, because I mean, in this new era, it's kind of a feather in a fighter's cap, like with how much weight you can cut, and it's such bullshit. I mean, I don't know if I can curse. I'm sorry if
I don't know either. It's all right.
This is YouTube, Terry. You could do anything you want.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I like that. Tell with the censors. But yeah, I mean, with like my opinion, if I interject my opinion in this. Look at today's greats, Mayweather, Pacquiao, Hopkins, like a lot of these guys, the really great fighters never ballooned up and had a cut. I mean, they're paying way more of a cost in our opinion, but that was the Mills Lane kind of ethos that I grew up under. So that's why I feel that way pretty strongly too today.
Yeah. I mean, like, I utmost respect for Hopkins. I remember like he was in prison. He lost his first pro fight. The warden. I think the story is the warden told him like you're going to be back here within a year, and Hopkins never looked back. But as a fighter in the ring, like I would think
he went back, Slava, but he didn't go back as an inmate. He went as a guest.
Yeah. But I think Hopkins in the ring, like probably a ref would have his hands full with that. Punching low on the other side of the ref. What about did he ever an opinion regarding like the greatest fighter of all time?
I just asked him that this morning because I've heard him talk about so many things in boxing. He never had an all-time favorite. And there's just too many, I think, for him to count. So he doesn't really have an all-time favorite. He did have quite a good feeling about Muhammad Ali. I mean, it's obviously the most politically correct thing you could say. My dad is the most not politically correct person that you can imagine. But Ali is just, I kind of think that we can learn about Ali, and I know Mike knows Muhammad, the life of him, and he knew him personally. But I think you had to be alive at that time to really understand the impact that this individual had. My dad crossed paths with him twice. One was at the 1960 Olympic trials, where Cassius Clay and my dad were in the same trials in San Francisco, but my dad actually refereed one of his bouts later with Bob Foster, and not a lot of people know about that. I think my dad just kind of my dad was a little bit older than him, but just kind of having their boxing careers, kind of go at the same time. My dad, I think that just Muhammad had a huge impact on my dad's life. So he never said, "Oh, he's the greatest fighter," but I know my dad thinks he's, in the top 3.
Mm-hmm.
The great sports writer and columnist Jim Murray of the LA Times, he sat next to me when we covered that fight at State Line in 1972. And his lead the next day in the LA Times was, after 7 knockdowns, he said, Bob Foster was down more times than a ship with a drunken crew.
Well, actually, this was not planned, but over my right shoulder is a photo of that fight, Lake Tahoe at State Line. And actually, Bob Foster was also in the 1960 Olympic trials in San Francisco. So all 3 men were in the same Olympic trials, and years later in the ring in Lake Tahoe together. So it's a kind of one of our favorite pieces here in the house. We got lots of cool stuff, but that's one of our favorite pieces. Well, I have some, there's some posters of local bills that were put up around Reno when my dad would fight. Ray Leonard with Mancini, more Mancini, the bite fight. I love this photo. There's kind of like one behind me. It's kind of abstract, and my dad refereeing. It's black and white. I don't know what the fight was. I don't know who the fighter was, but it's my dad kind of in action after a knockdown. That's one of my favorites. But I'm looking at a original Ferdy Pacheco. We have one that he painted for my dad and actually has a personal inscription on the back. We just have, I think maybe 10% is put up, actually. We have so much in storage I can't even count.
Nice.
Now here's one. Well, obviously, maybe I'm a noob on this. How did the catchphrase "Let's get it on" come about? What's the history of it?
I wish I had a good story for that. I've asked my dad this a million times, even prior to the stroke. He just said he kind of came up with it. I thought maybe it was a Marvin Gaye reference at the time.
Okay.
But he says it wasn't. He just said, I'm just going to say, let's get it on. And it kind of caught on. I don't know if it was the very first fight, but when it first really kind of was in the hot, at the forefront, the first big assignment my dad had was Holmes Cooney. And that's the first time in a really big fight he said, let's get it on. And it just caught on, man. I'm glad it did.
No, it's one of these things that when you're a kid, you're watching these big fights. Okay, you got your Tyson, you got your Holyfield, but you also have your "Let's get it on." It's like Michael Buffer's Ready to Rumble. Whatever it is, it's that memory. It's part of the show.
Let me put it to you this way, Slava. What our Arthur Mercani was to the Ali Frazier generation, the generation that came after that, is Mills Lane is the Arthur Mercani of his generation.
I think it's an accurate
most respected referee. Both well-disciplined guys who stayed in shape from start to end. And, the respect that both of them had is unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
Mills Lane, Casey still has the respect.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, if you go to, let's say, boxing forums or Facebook groups, and there's once in a while people ask that question, who's the best referee? Mills Lane is on there. I'm serious. I'm not doing it just to, when you want to always stroke somebody's ego or whatever. It's just a fact. If you see that, that's always a constant there. Mills Lane. Okay, you got your, some people say Tony Weeks or whatever. There's other names.
Yeah.
But Mills Lane is a constant. He presided, to me, 3 of the weirdest fights ever. We were discussing it, Tyson-Holyfield, Holyfield-Bowe. Which was the strangest, and were there any other obscure ones,
Well, so this was something he always said, and it makes sense if you think about it. So I was actually at the Fan Man fight, which was insane. That was my first big title fight in Vegas that I personally went to with my dad. But that was just kind of a maniac guy interrupting a big fight. The Tyson bite fight, everybody remembers that. It's one of the most infamous moments in sports history. But my dad said, you know what, that always happened. That happened in the heat of battle. It really did. The Oliver McCall fight, with Lennox Lewis was the strangest thing my dad said he ever seen in a fight. And we were talking on text, Slava, a little bit yesterday. You saw something that I've always noticed: the compassion in my dad's face for McCall, who was clearly having, I don't know, a nervous breakdown, whatever you want to call it. And truly, it was just one moment of all the thousands of hours of tape of my dad refereeing a fight where he kind of didn't know what to do. Here's a guy who doesn't want to fight. No one knew what was going on.
He was having a mental breakdown in the ring.
So I really did see the kind of like compassionate father that I have always known to McCall. But just because that was, I mean, my dad always said that was the strangest thing that ever happened. And yeah, he did get all the weird ones. You know, he had, I think a week or two after the Tyson fight, the Tyson bite fight, he had to disqualify Akinwande for not wanting to fight and holding Lennox Lewis up at Lake Tahoe. And I was at that fight too. It was just a mental situation. But the Oliver Lewis fight with the mental breakdown was always the weirdest fight that he always said he refereed.
You said about the bite fight, that's happened. You know, I remember that there's another fight, which I don't think he refereed, but it was Galata versus Samson Pua. And Galata just bit him on the shoulder. I mean, again, this is not a known one. This is like an obscure fight.
Yeah.
So this sort of thing, surprisingly, does happen where fighters bite each other, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's one of those things where, like, I mean, look, biting's not good. It's illegal. You can't do that. But it is something that happens in a moment of frustration, or, as my dad would say, in the heat of battle. So these other things that happen, like someone just heaving, crying, that was crazy. But I mean, listen, boxing, it's a lot of crazy stuff has happened and will happen again.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because regarding the Tyson-Holyfield fight, I mean, again, there's no justification for biting Holyfield's ear, but Tyson's complaint has always been that Holyfield used his head. Did your dad have an opinion on that? Like Holyfield was sort of, you know, he's giving him 1-2 and then like moving his head in there, you know?
Well, so first of all, if anybody wants to read a book about the bite fight, George Willis wrote a book called The Bite Fight, and it is the most detailed. It's just a great read about this confluence of events that happened up to making that fight, behind the scenes stuff. When my dad woke up that day in Reno, he did not know he was refereeing that fight. He got picked last minute because Mitch Halpern, who was a great friend, RIP, God bless his soul, great friend of my father's, and my dad was a mentor to him. He did the first fight, and Tyson complained about the headbutts, and the Tyson camp said, we're not going to fight with Mitch Halpern. They actually, I think, requested my dad, or at least someone knew. So my dad got called last minute on a plane within hours, again, not expecting that when he woke up that day, to referee that fight. We love Mike. Mike Tyson is a huge part of my childhood. But the old Mike Tyson kind of used his own head too. And, you know, he was like the bull in the china shop, you know, come in, earmuffs on, and come in with his head strong. And what my dad always said is that he was a bully, and anybody who stands up to the bully will usually prevail. And that was Holyfield. And, you know, I don't think, look, when I watch the fight, I don't see a egregious, you know, use of the head that really was against the rules or anything like that. There are two guys who come forward and their heads are going to clash. But like, listen, the old Tyson used that to his advantage in his old fights. And, you know, it just wasn't the same Tyson really, perhaps after prison. And so I kind of think that people want to point to the headbutts. I kind of think it's foolish and bullshit. That's my opinion. I don't know what my dad has to say about that too much, but I would think that I'm kind of in line with his thinking, because that night was just an insane night.
Terry, one thing I think people forget, and of course I was there, I was in the ring before and after the fight in my role as vice president of PR for Don King. I had to tell Don King to move his foot. He said, why? I said, your foot is on Amanda's earlobe. But the point being that
I don't know if we're to laugh or not, you know, Mike, that sounds like it could be true, but it could also.
It was true. It was true. There was a guy in the arena who was trying to collect the earlobe. And somebody asked him later, he got it, and he had to give it back. And eventually went back to Holyfield and was surgically reattached. What did you intend to do with the earlobe? And the guy said, you ever heard of eBay? So he had a profit motive. But my point is, I was in Tyson's dressing room, and he was fuming. King was fuming. two things. Don told me, go get Reverend Jesse Jackson from ringside. I said, for what? And King said to me, what do you mean for what? For a prayer. I said, Don, you have the prayer before the fight, not after this act of cannibalism. Anyway, I went and got Reverend Jackson, but Tyson took off. But I'll never forget, King told me to go into the press conference and check the temperature and the mood. And I'll never forget, Mills was at the podium being asked questions about what happened. And I'll never forget what he said, how he doled out justice. The first bite he let go, but the second bite, it was too far. So you got a 2-bite rule. I guess that's the bottom line.
Well, listen, I mean, it was funny. I remember, first of all, it took for me to be a senior in high school to convince people that I did not have Holyfield's ear in my freezer at home. That was a rumor that just persisted, and I still have to convince a few people.
That's funny unless you're Evander Holyfield. It's not so funny.
Yeah. No, but it was a crazy night. But I remember just a lot of boxing. I mean, we're talking writers and stuff would call our house, and some would say, oh, my dad should have clearly stopped it after the first fight. And then someone, the other half of the people said, oh, they should have let it go because, Holyfield was good and wanted to fight. So, I mean, really, it was such a mixture of
Not
opinions.
only that, Terry, he had 2 ears, not one.
Well, I don't know. There's some law with like dog biting where like if your dog bites a person,
2-bite rule.
It's called, I think it's called first bite free. So I don't know if this is where my dad's brain went, but first bite free was not your fault. And then the second bite is culpable on the owner. So there's some sort of comparison or parallel there. I don't know,
but by the way, I was gonna say the Pua and Galata fight, the guy Galata wasn't disqualified for that fight. He was, that fight continued. And I remember I wrote Pua once and I asked him like, what?
That was a bite on the shoulder, not on the ear.
That's true. But again, when you're talking about biting your opponent in a boxing match, I think it's like, that's like a separate category.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me if it was how many bites. And I said, what do you think? This is all you can eat?
Those jokes. I mean, those jokes are they're gonna never end. Like the bite jokes. But I remember, Pua even said he must have been hungry.
Who do you think is going to win between Tyson and Holyfield if they fight? Holyfield.
Holyfield. All right. So Terry, now that we've seen what who your dad's going to go for when that third fight's going to go down, because it's the money is there. But why do you think your dad's going for Holyfield there?
Well, so I think he predicts Holyfield because, like he always said, Tyson was a bully, and you just have to have someone stand up to the bully, and Holyfield did that not once but twice. I mean, Holyfield took a beating to Tyson 2 times. So it's hard to believe that anything else would happen differently this third time. Plus, Holyfield's been in the ring as in a real fight way more recently. And listen, I mean, I keep in touch with Evander a little bit, but he doesn't get out of shape. I mean, he likes to stay in shape. I know Tyson does too, but it's just hard to think of why there would be a reason that Tyson would actually win in some sort of exhibition. That's what I think. And I think that's probably in track with what my dad thinks as well.
We need to talk about the two fighters, Chinese fighters. So Terry can let us know he and his brother are handling these 2 fighters.
Okay, yeah. So
I'll be quick. I'll just say like a few things. Like it's super exciting because China's really starting to get into the professional boxing game. We're in almost 1 billion homes on TV in China. There's a heavyweight, Zhang Zhilei, who's with Eddie Hearn and Matchroom. We're very happy with that. And Meng Feng Long, who's a light heavyweight. He was supposed to fight Artur Beterbiev in March. COVID canceled the fight. We're still kind of working through that mess, but he's a top light heavyweight, and he's coming back to train in the U.S. We're excited. I'm working with Kurt Lee and Scott Schaefer, my brother, and it's just a huge opportunity for us, and we're super excited and having a lot of fun doing it.
Terry, tough question for you. Can you say "Let's get it on" in Mandarin?
Oh man, no, I cannot. I should find out how to say it.
Let's leave it alone.
Well, can you say it? So you can say it in, you can say it in English. You could say, try to do your best dad impression. How about that?
You know what? You might want to call my brother because my brother can actually do a pretty good impression. I cannot. He's got the pipes for it, but like, let's get it on. I can't do it. I'm always like, let's get it on. Let's get it on. You know, but Tommy has the pipes for it. But Tommy's got my dad's vocal cords.
Like I said, I really appreciate you doing this. You know, your dad has, like I said, it's just one of these things from your childhood that you remember as a third man in the rings.
I looked up the term icon in the boxing dictionary, and I saw a picture of Mills Lane.
I appreciate that, Mike.